Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, wherever you're tuning in from. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us this morning. I will go ahead and kick things off with some instructions on how to ask questions live during our Ask Me Anything About Web APIs webinar. There are a couple different ways to ask questions as you have them come up. So the first way is in person over the air. You can click that raise hand icon on your right side of the screen on the control panel there. We will promote you to a panelist once we have a moment to do so. And then we'll ask you to unmute and share your webcam. And then you can ask your question on air with the rest of us. And then the second option, if you'd be more comfortable, is through text. So type your questions into the question panel. You'll see that on the right side on your control panel once again, and hit send. And we'll get to those as we can throughout. We'll do our best to get to every question this morning. If we aren't able to get to your question, we'll definitely follow up by email as well. So look out for that if not. Awesome, and I'll just leave this up for the remainder of the time, but I do see we already have a couple of questions that have come in here this morning, and I see one that would be a great fit to get started with perhaps. So the question is, when would I want to use an API? Does anyone on the panel want to take a crack at that one?
Sure, I can. So APIs in FME are used when we don't have that existing functionality in FME and you want to leverage the service itself instead of going through one of our transformers or our readers and writers. So a lot of applications now have APIs which you can easily connect to in FME. So it's a great way to kind of get more mileage from FME. Does anyone have anything to add there?
I think that covers it. Yeah, it would mainly be if we don't have a reader or a writer for it, but even within those readers and writers, I know with the Salesforce one, there are certain fields that can't be read in by the reader and writer, things like lat long, as well as anything that is like base 64 encoded. So that's where, again, you'd want to use that Salesforce or an API just because you can get the functionality that way. Yeah, I think it's actually pretty neat with a lot of the transformers and readers and writers that do use the APIs as well. You can actually see it in the log information as the translation is running. So it'll tell you right in the translation log if it is using any API for you to look into if you want.
Awesome. Okay, another question we have here that's come in. I am confused about how to handle JSON. How do you fragment it in the response?
This would be a good time for us to pull up FME. I have one open so I can share my screen, but if you guys have tips and tricks as well, let me know. Sorry, sharing. Oh, is it possible for me to share my screen?
Yeah, let me give you controls here. All right, should prompt you there.
Perfect. All right. So if you're working with a REST API in FME, then you'll pretty much always get JSON as your response. We have several JSON transformers that can break down that response and turn them into attributes in your FME workbench. But it can be quite overwhelming to start if you don't know what you're doing yet. So there's a few kind of little tips and tricks that I use for breaking down a JSON response, but I'd also like to get input from everyone else here. So from your HTTP caller, you will get a response. It will likely be in this attribute called the response body, unless you change something in the actual transformer. What I like to do when I'm looking at this response is it's not very nice to look at it right in the attribute itself. So sometimes I will copy and paste it into another application, or I can use something like the JSON formatter to be able to see it better formatted. Sorry, I'm laughing because my partner is taking out my dog and my dog is now hiding underneath my desk. Okay, come on, Teddy. You go for a walk now. I don't know what he's doing. Anyways, so the JSON formatter is a good way to see your JSON better formatted, so you know what to parse and what attributes you need to have access to. So that's often my first step. Oh, this is inside a custom transformer. This is in case we get asked about pagination. So from the formatted JSON, you can better see what attributes you can have access to. So I think in this example, I was looking at things under this items. So first I would need to go into items and then get access to these request parameters. So in my JSON query in this example, I'm looking into items, and if you have like an attribute, you need to put it in quotations, and then I'm looking at everything under items there. As well, when you're doing this, you also need to expose your attributes. So anything that I'm trying to grab from this, I'm going to look at under here and type it out. And this is kind of my method for fragmenting JSON. I'm not sure if anyone else has anything they'd like to share.
I follow a similar method. I guess we could mention that there's other JSON transformers for pulling those values out of the JSON. So if you don't want to fragment the JSON body into individual feature types, you could use things like the JSON extractor and the JSON flattener. I think in the end, they all use a similar sort of method of using JSON queries to pull out those values. So once you get the hang of using one, using the others are just as easy, really. It's just following the pattern of how to identify which keys you're looking for, which values, and how you'd like them to be output in your workspace. Yeah, I think we have a really good tutorial up on our community, getting started with JSON, that covers everything from extracting those values and building JSON as well, with things like the JSON templater, I believe. Yeah.
Cool. I'll drop that into the chat room as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I already dropped that in.
Awesome.
Just beat you to it.
I tend to use the JSON flattener when my JSON's pretty simple and I just have like one set of values I need to get out of it, basically just values I need to expose. That's when I'll use the JSON flattener. I'll use the JSON fragmenter for anything more than that. Like if I need to parse apart the JSON first and then get those attributes, then I'll use the fragmenter. And I actually don't use the extractor at all. I think I just never started using it and I've never tried since.
Cool. We do have another question on the line of JSON. We may have already covered this in our responses, but Brent is wondering, what is the best way to write back to JSON multiple subarrays with attributes from other transformers? And I know Sunny touched on other transformers there.
Yeah, that would be the JSON templater transformer if you want FME to do it for you. And that transformer, I would highly suggest looking at the specific tutorial you have for using the JSON templater. It's got a little bit of a learning curve just to figure out where your attributes go, how to build those nested lists if you're doing that. But one thing of it, yeah, it's really powerful because you can use FME to build these long, complex sort of JSON bodies for you without having to manually type it out. If anyone has any tips for this transformer, throw them out because I think I benefit from it.
Awesome. Okay, we do have another question that's come in this morning. Do you have a template to read Census APIs, or how would you read Census ACS APIs using FME?
I know we have a US Census caller, which is up on FME Hub. So hopefully this is the same census you're looking for, but you can download the transformer and then click embed and edit to be able to see the calls that it's making. what is it doing here? It's using a feature reader, which is interesting. What is it reading? JSON, and then using an HTTP caller. So I definitely recommend checking out the US Census caller. As far as other resources, I believe that's all we have, unless anyone is aware of something else.
Yeah, it looks like that's it on the hub from what I can see here. There's a couple of external documentation links in the hub page as well, so I'll send out the chat to that, or the link to that in the answers panel.
I'm pretty sure on the playground, the FME server playground, we have a demo with the US Census caller as well.
Awesome, thanks both. We do have a few more questions trickling in quickly this morning. So we do have a longer question. I might just read out the beginning and ask our panelists to kind of look at this individual specific scenario to perhaps help answer this question live. So it's asking, can you review how to pass a token in the HTTP caller? They're using the HTTP caller to access an API URL that requires token authentication. And it looks like they've kind of detailed their scenario there a little bit as well in the questions panel.
So if you're using OAuth 2, I think you'd pretty much always want to create a web service for this. So if you're just passing in a token, you'll have the token be valid for a very short period of time. Typically it's an hour. You can pass it into your call and it'll work then. You might be able to have another call to get that token, but for OAuth 2, we typically do use web services in FME. So I'm on a Mac, so this looks a little different, but if you go, it should be Tools, FME Options for Windows, but you can see Web Connections here, Manage Services, and then if you click the plus box down here, you can create an OAuth 2 service. And if you follow the documentation of your API, you should be able to set up the parameters in here, and then this should be able to get the token for you. And then in your call in the HTTP caller, all you would do is down here for authentication method, you'd want to have your web connection that you created from that web service. Other than that, if you just want to pass in like a regular token, like not something that's OAuth, not something that's going to expire quickly, then you would typically do so in the header and do so according to the API documentation. Does anyone have anything to add there?
That sounded good to me.
All right, we have an individual who's asking if it would be possible to gain a better understanding for looping pagination of data using FME. They're not quite sure like where to get started with that. Is that something we might be able to address this morning?
Yeah, for sure. So I have a workspace up right now. I was expecting this question because it's something that lots of people have questions within FME because it's something that's a little trickier to do. With Pagination and FME, you'd want to use a custom transformer and a loop. I see someone up here said, I have a blocking transformer within my loop, which typically is quite an issue when you're working with custom transformers. We recently did a custom transformers webinar with FME, and that kind of goes over how to work with the blocking transformer within the loop. But if at all possible, if you could take that blocking transformer and not have it in that loop, it'll make things a lot easier. For those who don't know, a blocking transformer is a transformer where it'll wait for all features to arrive before writing out. With looping, that can be kind of difficult. It has to be done behind the scenes in a custom transformer, because you won't be able to like go through this page and do it. It's has to be something that's not embedded, but a linked custom transformer. So it just makes it a lot more difficult to work with. So if you could get the looping done beforehand in a custom transformer and then have the other transformers you need outside of that loop, I think that's the best way to go. Dave, have you worked with looping quite a bit and blocking transformers?
Actually, I have, and maybe it might help if you switch the screen sharing over to me. I've got a basic template of how the loop would look like. Let's see.
I think
Okay. So you should be looking at my. Yeah. Okay. So this is just a basic template of a way you can sort of set up a loop. Now there's different ways of pagination. Sometimes you you know the number of features, but you're only allowed so many in a query. And then in that case, if you know the features and how many, and you're limited to the number of query, it's almost better to set up say a cloner instead of using a loop and just send in multiple calls. But if you don't know the total number of features, then you'll have to create a loop because you'll have to get an empty response and know, hey, I'm done. Alternatively, some APIs will automatically paginate for you. So if you just request everything, it'll only give you, say, the first 10,000, and then it will have a link in there to say, hey, next page link is such and such. So in this case, we have I just have a quickie loop custom transformer set up. We have the initial HTTP caller on the input. In this case, we're testing for the pagination link. So we have one string goes out the XML fragmenter. I'm assuming an XML response here, and that's just going to break up all the response we get, and that goes to the regular output. And we also have an XML query extractor here, and that's going to query the response to see if you have a pagination link. If so, it will extract the link, build a new query based on that link, and loop it through to loop input, and then it just repeats again. And this loop will repeat until basically this comes up empty. That's one way of doing it. The other way you could do it is in the XML fragmenter. You could also take this rejected, or actually you would take probably a sampler off of the output, and then you would say go into the templater to create a new query. So in this case, we don't have a pagination link, but you're getting responses back. So you're getting a response back from the XML fragmenter. You're getting records back. We can always ask for another set of records. So in this case, in the sampler, you can go and just say, I just want one feature from this response, and then let's build my query to query the next set. You may need to keep track of the amount of queries you've gotten because you're going to add an offset to the query. So there's some more logic in there, but this is the basic pattern that you would use in this case. And like Sienna said, try to keep the looping part simple. Let's not have any blocking transformers in the loop. And this will just get you your features out. Now, if you want to do any further work with the features that requires blockers, throw them outside the loop, throw them outside this transformer, and put them into the main, or you can nest your custom transformers.
Mm-hmm. Another important thing to note in that loop, if you wouldn't mind going back, Dave.
Sure.
So in the HTTP caller, there is a parameter that needs to be changed in order to do this looping, and that's the concurrency / looping options.
Oh, cool.
You want to set that down to 1 if you're looping this in a custom transformer. Otherwise, things just get really messy really quick. So that's also a recommendation. This was new and it was added to 2021, I believe, is when this came out. But basically, this allows you to do parallelization with your APIs. I've had some great successes with it, and I've had APIs just say, no way, we're not going to accept you trying to make multiple requests at once. So it is something that you kind of have to play with a little and see what the rate limit is for your API that you're requesting. But it is a really good feature that we do have where you can parallel process, but it just won't work in a loop.
Ooh, this is first I've seen it. This is very exciting because that's usually in any of your workspaces. If you're doing API calls, it's the HTTP calls that are going to be your limiting performance factor.
Yeah, and so we introduced that, and then we also introduced rate limiting as well. So if you are making too many requests at once, you can get the HTTP caller to rate limit itself. So it's super useful. I tried using it for Salesforce API, just did not work. It just rejected me right away when I tried to use 25 calls at once.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so a few more questions that have come in, and just as a reminder, if you have any questions that come up, type them into the question panel there or raise your hand and we'll bring you on air this morning. So this individual asks, my portal web service periodically needs to be re-authenticated. Are there best practices about this? It might also be a user error.
Yeah, so with ArcGIS Online and Portal, it is expected that you would have to reauthorize every once in a while if you are using FME desktop. So when typically in an OAuth workflow, you have a refresh token and an access token. It's expected that the access token will expire, but given OAuth 2 protocols, you wouldn't expect the refresh token to expire. But in ArcGIS Online and Portal, the refresh token does expire after a bit, and that's why you have to do that reauthorization. And it's just a security thing that they implemented. Now for if you're using FME server and you don't want to do this manual reauthorization, what you can do is you can set up an FME server workspace and just run an access that like a feature service or anything, just use a reader and nothing else, and have that set up to run every day or so. And then you shouldn't have to manually reauthorize anything in FME server.
Excellent. And we have a question from Suzanne asking, do you have an example of an API loop call to an Esri REST endpoint?
I don't. I'm not sure if anyone else does.
I don't either. I'm trying to think if there would have been a demo in one of the other webinars we've done. I'll take a look on the webinars page and see if I can track anything down. I wonder if Trent might have covered that in one of his examples with the utility network.
Maybe.
I'll take a quick look there.
Awesome. Okay. And in the meantime, another question we've had is, I'm a freelancer just started with FME. I would like to understand where to start with an indoor mapping project and what are the tools I may need to set up interface for users to browse the map. I'm not sure if there's maybe some resources we might be able to share on that.
It depends on what application you're using for the indoor mapping. FME can create the indoor map data in a format the application can use. I guess the one of the most common ones would be ArcGIS Indoors, which is an extension to ArcGIS Pro, which can handle indoor mapping, and we can create data sets for that. I believe there's a template on the FME Hub, several templates to go to ArcGIS Indoors. You can also go to the Apple indoor mapping format. which is a bit more complex. It's a very sort of tightly controlled format, but we have the tools to go to that as well, and then you can publish that up to Apple's indoor maps and have it available to iOS users. That's the main two indoor mapping applications we support.
Awesome. And I think this question might be along similar lines to one you already addressed, Sienna, but someone is asking, when scheduling jobs every night, how can you make sure you don't need to re-authenticate every day? So like there's no way to automate that process. It sounds like that is something to be expected that you need to do.
So if you're talking about ArcGIS Online and Portal, if you're running a job every single night, you should not need to manually re-authenticate. The refresh token will last longer than a day, and if you're running a job, we'll get a new refresh token for you. However, if you are noticing that you do have to re-authenticate option, that's something for a support case. So you can just file a support case with us and we can take a look into it. This isn't for all web services. This is specifically an ArcGIS Online and Portal thing. They handle OAuth 2 in a different way than most other applications. So this shouldn't be for all web services. This should just be ArcGIS Online and Portal.
Okay. Another question we've had come in is, I am using FME Desktop and Server 2020.1 and having issues with the WFS Reader being sporadic and failing. Is there a way to do this using the HTTP caller? Authentication is basic with user name and password in that case.
I wish Dean was here. I think you should be able to. I haven't personally done it, but I think once had a support case where the WFS reader wasn't working properly, and I believe Dean came up with a way to use the HTTP caller. Is this something you've done, Dave, at all?
Not really. But there's no, I mean, there's a kind of a multi-process going on when you're requesting WFS data that you'd have to handle with the HTTP caller. So you probably need a few of them. The first is to get the basic catalog, and then you would need to select from that catalog. I haven't done it that way. I'm more on the end of I've created a WFS service using FME, so I'm kind of working at it from the other end. But it would likely be multiple calls. Just the first one to get the catalog, and then the second one to request the individual tile or data, data tile. So yeah, I mean, if you're having a problem with WFS, I would really suggest contacting support and giving us the link to that WFS, and then we can have a look at it on our end and see what's up with it, whether it's an issue with the WFS server itself or whether it's an issue with our reader that's not talking to it properly. So yeah, I definitely recommend contacting support in that case.
Okay, so we have another question here from someone who's actually new to REST API with FME. They're wanting to know a basic workflow with REST API data and I guess reading it through FME. Is that something we would be able to show them how that works or explain that process?
Yeah, I think if you want like a better, more in-depth explanation of working with REST APIs and FME, Sinai just shouted out a webinar that we did. It was how to work with any REST API within FME, and it like goes through everything you need to know about working with REST services in FME. But I think we can definitely take you through an example and just show you kind of what you would need to do to get started. So now I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have a basic example? I can also create one if you don't.
Yeah, I might. If you want to pull one up in the meantime, I've just noticed that my video and audio is cutting out momentarily. I don't know
Okay.
if the audience has noticed my video is dropping off. I apologize. Getting new internet fiber this week, so this shouldn't happen anymore.
Sounds good. I can just pull up my previous workspace. Or actually, I think I have one from a webinar a little while ago. It might work a little better. All right, let's look at this one. Okay, I'm ready, Elizabeth, when you are.
Okay. So it should prompt you here now.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right, so when working with a REST API in FME, the first thing you want to do is get an HTTP caller on your canvas. The HTTP caller is what you would use to connect to pretty much any web service within FME. And now once you open up the HTTP caller, there's a lot of information in here, but basically all you have to do is follow exactly what's in your API documentation and then match that to your HTTP caller, and it should be mostly simple from there. So this is an example. It was taking photos that were in black and white and coloring them using a AI service. So if we go to, oh, that's not what I wanted. Colorize. Hopefully we can get to this website and I'll show you what this looks like. Deep API, colorize. There we go. So this is an API that you can have access to. This is using curl, but in the webinar linked, I showed how to read curl, but basically you have an image, which is your image URL, and then you have a header, which would be your token. So here in the HTTP caller, we have your API key, which would be a header here. And then we also have an image to upload. Probably a better example would be the FME server REST API documentation. Oh, I don't know what that is. With our documentation, it's very clearly laid out, so you know exactly what to put in to all of your requests. So let's look at resources maybe. So this will get resources and connections. So here we have parameters that you can modify in the URL. Let's say I want a limit of 10 and offset of 1. I can do that and it'll automatically modify my request URL. From here, I just copy and paste this. So the request URL would go in this request URL here. And then my header, I would want to add that here. So accept application JSON. Oh, it also helps when you write it in the right category. And then my query string parameters can go within my request URL, or I can have them separated out here. So my limit could go there. And that's basically the steps you would take when you're trying to work with an API the first time. But I really think watching our first webinar on this, we go into so much more detail on how to get everything started.
Awesome. Thanks, Sienna. So we've had another question here asking, are there any differences using HTTP caller and readers, JSON, WFS from Windows/Linux on FME desktop versus FME cloud? Is there a different library used?
So if it's between Windows and Linux, I don't think we're using anything different. Between the HTTP caller and our readers, it would look a little different. I believe we're using libcurl in our HTTP caller, but we'd obviously be using other packages in our readers and writers. But between Linux and desktop, I can't think of anything that would be different. Can anyone else?
No, I don't know if there's any, I'm not aware of any differences. But that is something we can take offline and look into more if you're experiencing any issues, or if it's just general curiosity, we can look into it and get back to you.
Awesome. Okay. And this might be more of a follow-up question as well, but do you need to URL encode the strings in the query header in the HTTP caller?
I don't believe so, no. We do have an encoder transformer if you are passing any sort of body, maybe in a put request or post request, that you can use to automatically encode your text or attributes.
Excellent. Okay. I do see a few more questions, and we should have time for a couple more as well. So if you think of any, definitely type them into the question panel. We're keeping a close eye on that. So here is a question about authorization methods. What authorization methods can FME handle?
So in the HTTP caller, if you're looking for authorization methods, you can just click use authorization here and see what we have available. So we have basic, digest, and TLM web connection. So that would be like your OAuth stuff again, and single sign-on. You can also use token authorization, which is really common in REST APIs. And that's typically done just by something in the header. It'd be like authorize, and then your FME token there. Just a note about single sign-on and stuff, that will typically only work if you're on a Windows machine. So I guess that is one difference between Windows and Linux. That's all I wanted to show my screen for.
Okay. Another question we've had, and we may have already slightly addressed this, I'm not sure. What information do I need in the upload body? How do I create that request in FME?
So it really depends on the API and the API documentation. So typically you'd see an upload body in something that's a post request. So you're sending data to the REST service. And if you're using REST, it's going to be pretty much always in JSON. I guess it's not always, but from what I've seen, a lot of the times you are using JSON to post to a REST service. And this is where you can use your REST templater to use it to create this request, or you can just do this yourself. If you have something like less complex, you can just use an attribute creator and create an attribute there. So upload body, and you can just manually put your JSON in here, and you could put whatever attributes in there as well if you want specific attributes for different upload bodies. Or again, if you're fancier, you could use the JSON templater, or you could just write it in here. One thing to note is there's this content type parameter. You'd want to set this over to application JSON to send it through to your REST service if it does require JSON.
And on the note of JSON, we have a question asking, do you have an example of the use of a more complex JSON templater to build the body?
Not on me right now, but there is that article that Dean created. I believe that we linked it earlier, and it goes through like a lot more complex examples for using the JSON templater.
Awesome. And I see one more question here. So this is a final call. If you have any more burning questions, definitely type them in and we'll be sure to get to them by the end. But this question asks, if a request works in Postman but not FME, how would I go about troubleshooting that?
Yeah, so if you don't know, Postman is an application that can be used to test out REST calls. Oftentimes when people are finding the REST calls aren't working, we'll ask them to test it out in something like Postman to see, is your REST call working there? If it's not working, if it's working in Postman, but it's not working in FME, that's definitely a time where like, please open a support case with us. We'd be happy to help you out there. Some things that I would think of right away is like your authentication different between the two. If you add a logger, is your request looking a little different between the two as well? That concurrency option can come into effect and kind of ruin things sometimes because it's automatically set to send 25 requests out at once. Web services can have issues with that. So your concurrency, if you could set that to 1 and test it out, those are the types of things I would be looking for. Does anyone else have any ideas?
Yeah, generally, I find what's happened to me when I've found those differences is it's the headers, the default headers between Postman and FME might be different. So take a look at the headers in Postman that you're sending out, and I think that's available on the user interface there. And in the FME, I mean, you've got your manually set headers, but there are also some headers we set automatically. Just take a look in the log, and I believe we will log out the headers we're sending. You may have to set the log to debug mode, but take a look at those headers and see if they're different, and you may need to add some headers in that header box in the HTTP caller to match the Postman headers.
Debug logging is huge when you're working with web services. So typically we'd recommend don't turn debug logging on, but if you're working with REST services, then it's very handy because it will show you the request that's being sent and exactly what's being sent back from that web service as well. We didn't show this off, but the HTTP caller has a rejected port. If you click on the magnifying glass, if you're using feature caching, on that rejected port, you should be able to see like a better error than what we provide you in the translation log. So if you're having issues, definitely look there as well. So for testing this, definitely turn debug logging on. And then as soon as you're done testing and you fixed your issue, turn it off, because otherwise it's just logs way too much.
Okay, and with that, I will dive into some wrap up here this morning. And if you do have any other questions that come up after the webinar, be sure to reach out to us on the community or with live chat as well, of course. And we'll also stay online for a minute or two to follow, just in case any other questions pop up in that question panel. So I just wanted to mention that before we move on. And as a thank you for joining us this morning, we do have a community badge here. The code is ABGMF. And just visit fme.ly/webinar badge to redeem that. And I will share that out in the chat in just a moment here as well, in case you don't have a chance to type that in. The peak of data integration, our 2022 UC. I think this has been a long time coming, and we're eagerly anticipating this and really, really hoping that we can be hosting this in Vancouver this year now, because it is officially 2022. So how exciting. We have the links to apply to present and also to register. I will chat those out in a minute as well. And check out our upcoming and on-demand webinars. So safe.com/webinars. We have a lot of great resources there under the on-demand tab. I know we've mentioned a couple of them today as well. And then we also have lots upcoming in the next couple months. So thanks everyone for joining us this morning. Try FME for free, safe.com/trial. And thanks so much to all of our presenters as well. Sinai, Dave, Chris, and Sienna for joining and answering everyone's questions. It was a lot of fun to join you all.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, and bye for now. If you have any questions that come up, type them in and we'll be online for a minute or two longer. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.